thanks for having us. We really appreciate it. I got a lot of nice calls this week from people saying they were looking forward to you speaking. Apparently, you have a bit of a reputation for not doing this too often, so we thank you for that. Lorenzo is not your usual movie mogul, though he's also your usual movie mogul. As a matter of fact, he's had a bunch of mini careers. Briefly a professional soccer player in Europe, briefly a professional chef. For a longer period of time, actually ran a river rafting company and is actually very active in teardownthose-damn-dams.com or whatever the hell it's called, something like that. It's about restoring rivers to their original non-dammed state. I actually thought that God created the dams, but what can you do about that? Incredible movie maker, great judge of taste. The New York Times called The Matrix, which Lorenzo optioned for nothing 5 years before it was ever made, and spent 5 years in various positions at Warner Brothers of his 20 years at Warner's or whatever the hell it was, insisting that they make The Matrix. And the New York Times said it was the most important movie in the last 30 years, I think they said, in science fiction, which, having watched it 8 times, I would agree with you. A lot of other really cool movies, The Perfect Storm, which is, I think, watchable over and over and over again. Ocean's 11, all the Harry Potters. I'll tell anybody who wants offline like the financial deal on Harry Potter, and you'll understand why Warner Brothers made so much money on it. Lorenzo negotiated a great deal. Since he's been at all Three Kings, which we know you love.
I'm sure Warners will love you to say that, V.
I already got like a nasty note from somebody in PR at Warner Brothers today on an unrelated matter, so they can't beat me twice in one day. And then since he's gone to Paramount as an independent producer and started his own company, he's done Transformers, Salt. We'd love to hear about Angelina Jolie and everything you want to tell us. The Reds, the G.I. Joes. We are going to ask Lorenzo to tell us a little bit about what he's working on. And despite all these way cool credentials, he also went to Harvard and University of Pennsylvania. So you can't do everything right, Lorenzo.
One of them was a mistake.
And again, those of you that want to know which one, you check me out on the sidelines. We'll fill you in. All right, so in all seriousness, that's a pretty impressive slate, and there's another 50 or 100 or 250 movies behind you as an executive at Warner Brothers. How in the world do you get into filmmaking? Both why did you get into it, and how did you get into it?
It was always a passion of mine, but growing up in the East Coast, it never occurred to me that it was a career path in a way. And I did do a lot of different things bouncing around, and when I was in my late 20s, I had an existential crisis and thought, I don't know what the hell to do. So I chose to go to business school to buy myself a credential in 2 years, frankly, of being in the crib and trying to figure out what the hell was I going to do. While I was there, I just looked at simply everything I've done and what I like to do, and I realized my passion was movies. I watched them, inordinate numbers of them, and had been very motivated by them. So I just moved to LA and got into the movie business. And what keeps me going in it is I love telling stories, and I think and that's in every format, whether it's a 2-hour movie or I think recently we've been getting involved in some things that'll be shorter time frames, and it's interesting to try to tell stories and keep people active and interested in them.
And since we know everybody in Hollywood wants the answer to this question, how does one get into the movie industry?
Yeah, well, you kind of just have to commit yourself to it, and it's a funny thing because there's no rules, which is the reason why the business appeals to me, is because there really aren't rules in it, and there are so many myriad ways of doing it. I knew no one in the movie business. Some people know everybody in the movie business. I just did it by working really hard and reading probably more scripts than anybody else read.
All right. And I guess starting a little bit at the bottom, too, despite having an MBA, huh?
Yes, right at the bottom.
That's
probably
one of the last industries that does it.
Probably right.
And before we get into talking both about mobile and digital and how it's different than traditional big blockbuster movies, I think we all want to know, what movies do you have that are in post-production and coming out? And what else are you kind of excited about that's coming down the pipeline for you?
Just finished shooting a movie called Kidnap with Halle Berry, and it's a story of a woman who sees her child being abducted and jumps into her minivan, and the movie is her chasing down the kidnappers. It is kind of a non-stop emotional ride. It's literally her going up and down. Can I do this? What should I do? It should be pretty exciting for all people to watch. This is one of those movies that everybody will understand the sort of essential hook of it.
Was it Swordfish she was in with you many years before?
That's exactly right. Yeah, and
those of you who like Halle Berry will go
decision.
and watch Swordfish, and there will be one scene that you will. Yes, you're down there too. There will be one scene in Swordfish that you'll be really glad you watched. Okay, we got one fan over there. Sorry.
Okay,
So after the emotional roller coaster, what are you going to give us next?
We're going to do a movie. It's called Unlocked. It's shooting right now. I go there tomorrow. It's in Prague. Michael Douglas, John Malkovich, Toni Collette, Noomi Rapace, and it's directed by Michael Apted, and it is a thriller, a spy thriller, not unlike Salt, a more modest budget, but it's pretty exciting. And the next thing up is really a gigantic enterprise called Deepwater Horizon, which is the true story of what happened that day when the well blew in the Gulf of Mexico. And having done Perfect Storm, it's probably the closest analogy to it. And it's really an amazing story. There's so little information about what really happened, although now we've acquired it, but if you try to go and read a newspaper article, you rarely can find out 11 people died that day. And the tales of heroism are quite extraordinary. And as a feat, a movie-making feat, it's a gigantic challenge. We're going to use 1 million pounds of steel to construct a rig. Sometimes movie-making isn't about all the creativity, it's about construction. And so G.I. Joe 3 is going to be starting in midsummer, and there's a movie called Hellbent, which is about to go, which I really, it's teetering on they're saying yes to it, and it's a really cool idea about essentially the Dirty Dozen goes to hell to kill Satan. So it's a wild.
Hey, wait! I'm on page like 96 of the script, so seriously, so okay. Don't say anything else.
The question is, can you kill Satan?
I'm scared
deeply
by the script alone. What was the Pacino one with the devil? This is like
Devil's
10 times.
Advocate,
this is 10 times more intense.
Yes, it is.
All right. So, and by the way, I'll just tell you one of the really great things about Lorenzo, and I suggested once that we leak this to the press. When he was at Warner Brothers, we would go to movies. He would buy a ticket for whatever Warner Brothers movie was at the theater that day, and then go into somebody else's movie. And I always wanted to get caught, because it showed how much he appreciated his directors and his actors, that he'd actually commit a misdemeanor on behalf of supporting them. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about digital. We've had the chance in the last couple of days to talk a little bit about this. It's kind of a two-part question. I think the first question I have is, are we going to see movies like you make, $100 million, $200 million movies, made originally precisely for smaller devices, made for the tablet, made for the phone? And to the extent that people are even watching these, how do you feel about making a movie for an 80-foot screen with high-end audio technology, and then knowing that some people, including your kids, are watching the movies on this?
I'll answer the second part first. It's an interesting thing because I go to my house and I see my son sitting with 3 friends. They're watching a movie on their iPhone or an iPad, and they're sitting in front of a giant TV screen that they're not even using. And it tells you a lot about how that generation is consuming content and what they care about. As a filmmaker, you make these grand scale things to happen on a grand scale, and so in a way it's frustrating, I guess, in a part. I mean, what's great is it makes it available to even more people, and more people will consume it more often, I believe. But fundamentally, you're working against what we do when you watch it on a small screen, especially these big movies. Now, there's a lot of movies that's not true of, and I think that's where the opportunity from a filmmaker point of view is to try to figure out the demands of putting it onto this are much less. Because the scale is not so big, you're actually not, as a filmmaker, asked to do as much. So I think there will be movies that are made specifically for it, but I think they'll be designed on a scale level that fits it.
You think scale's the biggest issue?
From a filmmaking point of view, it's the biggest issue. And the cost of scale is, I mean, as I was talking about Deepwater Horizon, what Matt just... you're involved in making a movie like this, you go, well, it's 1 million pounds of steel cost, like, you're not going to do that for a movie that's just that. And I don't mean just in a diminutive sense, I mean it just in the sense you don't have to have the same dimension to it. Now, my kids would consume Deepwater Horizon on this. So that's the interesting debate that goes on in Hollywood right now is what will this do to us? I don't think anybody really exactly knows. I look at it as a positive, because I think more people will just access movies, and the more that movies become part of the daily habit of people, we can regain some of the ground we've lost to gaming, actually.
Yeah, and of course, at one time, movies and radio were the frequent habit versus TV.
Yeah.
Which is.
Well, I think at some point, I think we've reached probably close to how many hours can you spend doing what. You know, so we've got to compete with that, just as all the different media forms have to compete with us.
Do you feel like we're going to see more 20-minute, 40-minute type movies, full stories, 3 acts, because they're made for this? Is this, do you think, would you be more inclined, budget and freedom of creativity, to make a shorter, smaller movie for this specifically?
Well, yeah, I mean, again, I look at the consumption patterns of my children's peer group, and they are happy to watch a 6-second thing. They're happy to watch a 30. You know, there's a real freedom in that for us. There's a lot of pressure when you go ahead and spend 150 or 200 or 250 million dollars to make a movie. You know, and that doesn't include marketing. So when you think about that, you know, some of these bigger movies that the audience is consuming a lot of these days is as much as a $400 million, $500 million output before anything came back. So there's a lot of freedom in being able to do that. You know, I think the problem from a Hollywood perspective is, how do you monetize that right now? So therefore, how do you justify spending your time doing it? I'm involved in doing several things in the digital space right now. We just started this up, and as well in the graphic novel space, which is, again, a different form. And I'm trying to experiment to try to find what sticks across the board.
Tell us a little bit about those digital deals. I think you've got, I think this is all public, a relationship with Break and a relationship with, is it Relativity?
Legendary.
Legendary.
Yeah,
Sorry, you get those.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're engaged right now in making, well, we just finished something called Dead Rising, which is based on a video game, where we went out and did essentially a 90-minute, which can be split up into 20-minute increments, 30-minute increments, or just keep it as 90 minutes. In the hope that we can find different ways of monetizing it and using it. And that was a great experience, because when you start thinking that way, it changes how you look at the story, you know. And anytime you start changing the way you look at story, you end up becoming a better storyteller. With Break, we did something called Higher Power, which was the first-time director. It is everything you shouldn't try to do. Tons of visual effects. A really kind of demanding concept to try to deliver at the kind of price point you need to do. And it's coming along really well. And you know, one of the things I have learned is, as you watch these visual effects now, it is a different criteria, the quality of what you have to do and not do. And so for me, those two they're not experiments, they're serious. There's a lot of money at stake, but they're the first times where I've done something specifically for a digital audience.
So when you're working on the Break project, are you thinking, or do you know if the director is thinking about, this is going to be on a 17-inch PC screen, or are you guys actually consciously thinking this is going to be on a 7-inch phablet or a 9-inch tablet or a 6-inch?
We're trying to be, it's interesting, I think we started out being conscious of it's going to be on a smaller mechanism. You know, it's going to be on a computer, it's going to be on an iPad, it's going to be on a mobile phone. And as we went about it, we started rethinking it, honestly, and saying, well, why make it, why not have it be essentially feature film quality and ability to reach theaters if necessary. And so I think it's something that has evolved over time into thinking about it in a different way. It may be a releasable film at the same time as you go digital.
I know this audience, I suspect there's some real interest in what the economics are of some of these deals. I assume a lot of people in the audience know that traditionally producers are paid a substantial production fee by the studio usually that's financing that movie. Do the deals work roughly the same way in the digital space? Do you guys
No, they're very different. We're really playing for the upside, which is great. I like playing for the upside. No, it's really about owning some part of the content, actually, because so far the dollar amounts don't justify the kind of fees you get in making a movie, and what you're trying to reach is differently. So I think that's all changing too. I've noticed it over the last year and a half. Deals are everybody's trying to find the right mix of deal and content, and it's an exciting place to be because of that. I find it really challenging, and my kids are probably tired of me asking them so many questions about what they like and don't like, and their friends are now getting fed up too. So I'm going to need a new research group soon.
I'm sure we can work something out. So let's talk. I want to skip around a little bit from what we were talking about. We talked about talking about brands, and I think this actually is a somewhat natural segue into brands. You're the first movie maker that I know who ever talked about things like building movies around Hasbro toys, which you talked about way before you finally did it. Give me a little bit of sense of how you got to a movie like Transformers or G.I. Joe, and how that is different than kind of the traditional way brands. I mean, I think of the traditional brand presence in a movie as being, I had to look this up on Wikipedia, as James Bond driving the Aston Martin. I could not actually remember what the one was before the BMW. You know, that seems to me like classic product placement pretty much. Transformers seems like a very different sort of thing than just product placement for Camaro.
Okay, so it seems like there's a few questions in that question. All right, let me break it down. I think, first of all, when you look at brands in terms of IP, I think people have been somewhat narrow-focused up till recently, and I think one of the reasons why I responded to Transformers and G.I. Joe is they actually have quite a rich mythology in comic books and in cartoons as we grew up watching them. So there is actually quite a bit of material and characters and things you can draw on, and that made it much easier. I think, you know, when you approach something like Barbie, it seems like a great opportunity in a way, looking at a different toy, but it doesn't have the mythology. It has a fan base, and it has probably a very loyal fan base. So I think what originally attracted me to G.I. Joe is I knew a bit about the mythology, and I knew sort of on a deeper level that it had penetrated our society. I mean, anybody knows when you say G.I. Joe, they know what it is, you know? So you're already got the consumer. They understand the concept. They understand to some extent, they already have an affinity to the brand. You know, using product in movies, I think, I don't know why Hollywood has often had a sort of a standoff point of view about it. I don't look at it as selling out. I know some people do. I sort of look at our world and say, look around the room. I can see a lot of brand names. Like if you make a movie and there's no brand names in it, it doesn't really look real to me. The Camaro, I think, you know, has proven to be an unbelievable mutual thing has happened. Is, you know, for GM, again, my test group, all the kids in the high school that my kids go to, everybody wants a Camaro. It's fascinating, you know.
You should tell the truth. Your wife wants one too.
She has one. So
and what color is it?
Black, of course. You know, I think it's not unique, but it is rather special. What's happened, you know, is that the filmmaking team, and in particular Michael Bay, spent a lot of time making sure that the character of Bumblebee, the Camaro, is something that people genuinely love. He's a lovable character. And that sort of, and at the same time, we shot him in a cool way. So it's cool and lovable. That makes that a really desirable product, you know? You know, for us, Camaro said a lot of things about sort of the America we were setting the first movie in a sense, sort of a little bit of a throwback world where things don't seem quite as hectic as they are. You know, and I think, but there's been a lot of different brands used in a lot of different ways. I've used product placement in a lot of ways, but I try to, when I'm using with the brand, what the irony is that, you know, a great example is Transformers. We had a really hard time in the first movie getting any brands aboard. We were successful in getting a few, and the irony is that when you're a filmmaker, the first one has the hardest time. It's the one that needs the most help, and it's the hardest to get companies on board because it's an unknown entity to a certain degree. The second and third, you know, we're getting the clamor to get in when we don't really need the help. And so what we've done and what I do as a producer is I develop, the people that are loyal and have come in early with us are people that we work with to make sure their brands are actualized, and so it doesn't just become about what the deal is, it comes about the relationship, There's a company called Royal Purple, is a good example, that makes motor oil, and they came in as a product placement, but they've come in on movies that we could hardly get people to come in, and so the result is we have a relationship with the company, and if you saw Salt, when Angelina Jolie jumps off the bridge and lands on the truck, Royal Purple's that truck, and so we purposely put it there because it's a moving vehicle, and therefore it supports the notion of motor oil. So it's not just a billboard that you go by. And it's also natural that a truck would be driving around with that on it. So our job, when we are really in a trusting relationship, which is what I try to achieve, is to find a way to maximize the brand for them, which also, in a way, utilizes the best for us.
So these guys are having the Royal Purple people are reading your scripts.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they give you notes?
No. We have enough people giving us notes.
Yeah, you're not sure that.
Yeah.
Other toys?
The person downstairs, when you enter, the valet gives you notes, so it's
well, it's worth what you pay for it, right? Other toys that you're toying with for movies? There have been some other toys out there that you weren't responsible for, like Battleship.
I'm sure Hasbro appreciates you bringing that up.
I thought I was pretty delicate.
Not right now. I mean, there are a couple, but I wouldn't want to talk about them right now because we're still trying to figure out what to do and how to do it. And for me, there's also things that are common sayings that are brands that people don't recognize, I think. When we approached Warner's Cats and Dogs, everybody immediately went, oh, I know what that is, even though they have no idea what it is. But we all said raining cats and dogs. So to my mind, that's a brand. And therefore, what's your expectation when you hear the words cats and dogs? Well, I guess they're fighting, right? Fighting like cats and dogs. So I think there's a lot of different ways to look at what is a brand. And I think actually there's a lot of movies getting made about religious figures, which in a way Noah's a brand. It's like you now see Exodus. I guess Moses is a brand. So I think there's a lot of different ways of looking at it.
Care to mention any that you're not specifically working on that you think are interesting examples of brands that could be in movies someday? Characters in movies?
Well, the Jolly Green Giant seems like something that should be a character in a movie. We all know what it is. We all, I don't think Shrek has ruined it for the Jolly Green Giant. So I think that's probably a brand that if they were interested in doing something, I don't know if it's a full movie. You'd have to look at it, but it's certainly a character in a movie.
I hope you're not going to get mad at me, but when we talked, you mentioned Harley Davidson, which, even though I'm not a biker whatsoever, obviously, I went like, wow, I totally could see a big Harley Davidson bike as a character.
Yeah, and I think, I think that's probably a lifestyle brand. I'm not sure what they term themselves, but, when you say the word Harley, it means a lot of things to people. It's a little like saying G.I. Joe, that you already have a sort of sense of what it is. It may be negative, it may be positive, but you have a sense. So that means you've got my attention. You've got the consumer's attention.
All right, let's talk a little bit. I'm not 100% sure how much time we have left. I love all the devices here, but I'm missing the little ticker counter. What do we got, about 10 minutes left, roughly? Let's talk a little bit about digital communities. It seems that there are certain big franchise movies that have people interested in them on social media, on their own websites, sharing content that's put out by the studios or leaked out of the studios. Do you guys think about the digital communities when you think about your marketing? Do you tend to the digital communities around your movies, in between the movies? Kind of, what does this idea of both social media and digital communities mean to you as a filmmaker and a film marketer?
Well, I think Hollywood's getting better at this. I think that we're learning along the way what it means to interact with the digital audience. I mean, there's certain movies and like Transformers that comes in already with a very rabid fan base, that is an active digital fan base, we tend to think of the fan base as more in marketing time frame than actually in making the movie. I think that's something that will evolve over time. The hard part about making, especially these big movies, is on Transformers, there's 4,000 people working on it. So the management of that is, forget about the creativity of it, the management of it is staggering. So then to try to think about, okay, now how are we going to manage our digital communities and all the different things you want to do, it tends to be that the priority becomes this machine that's getting all these people headed down the, I always call a big movie, it's like a steamroller. It's going down the road. There's sort of two choices. One is like the guy in Tiananmen Square who put out his finger. Our steamroller doesn't stop for that guy. One of two things happens. Either run him over or you veer onto the sidewalk and kill a lot of people. So you got to just stay on the train and on the steamroller in that case. And so what happens, I think, is you've got to it's part of what the studios have done, some of them particularly well, is they've really built out digital groups that are really solely focused on that. It started where we would really pay attention. I think we would make small games or puzzles or a way to get the audience to interact, and it just keeps getting more and more and more. And I think it will continue to ramp up.
Do you find the studios and directly bringing you as a producer into the marketing strategy and marketing implementations? I mean, do you actually sit in meetings and talk about what they're going to be doing in terms of marketing?
I think every studio, they're sort of like filmmakers. They're tired of hearing all of our opinions on their advertising. But I think especially those of us who had a lot of experience. I ran a studio for a period of time, and the actual function of that, like there's not that many people who've gotten to be involved in as many campaigns as I have. So for instance, I have a lot of opinions and they probably get sick of hearing them after a while, but you built up a knowledge of it and an instinct about it. And the studios in general, I think, really are trying very hard to reach this audience in as many different ways as possible. So it will continue to be a bigger and bigger part of what they're doing.
And when you guys are talking about a digital marketing strategy, is this mostly getting out the trailer, getting out the TV ads?
No, I think it does include other things. And, it is about trying to interact with the audience. And, it can be in pulling them into games. It can be into actual personal appearances, where you go and interact directly with the fans. And, the fan base wants it, and the trick of it is that how much do we really want to give them, in a sense, because the entertainment is I believe the strongest part is the element of surprise. So the more you feed them, the more you're giving away what you're doing, and so that's this sort of problem of trying to balance those two things. Like there's certain filmmakers who show very, very little of what they're doing, and it's about, you better come and see it. Michael Bay and I both have a strong feeling about that as well, which is, we don't want to give away all the assets and all the wows, because if you know the wow, when you go there, it's not as big a wow. So I think actually the real big opportunity for us is finding a way to make digital content interactive with our audience without giving away too much of what our movie's about. So it's this interesting sort of balance you have to try to find.
When you're in these meetings talking about marketing and talking about the portion that's digital, do people talk about a difference between a mobile campaign and a PC-based campaign or a web campaign versus an app campaign? I mean,
I've never heard that differentiation. When we're looking at these big movies, we're looking at every single element. When you go through a marketing meeting, it's literally about a 2.5 to 3 hour meeting where you're talking about each application of what you're doing. So we don't talk about it as a difference. We talk about it as opportunity, each one of them.
You talk about digital versus TV as separate opportunities?
Yeah.
But within digital, not a lot of distinction between mobile versus PC or bigger screen.
I haven't
or
been a
smaller
part
screen.
of a conversation where that's been a big aspect to it.
Any sense? I know years ago it was like 3% that would typically be spent on some form of digital marketing in a movie. Any sense of what that number is today?
I don't know what it is, but it's well over that now. If I had to guess, I'd say it's more in the 20%, but it's definitely been exponential. And the campaigns, when you're presented with the campaign, Paramount, my deal is, they have an unbelievable digital group, and they've done a phenomenal job. And when you get presented with a campaign, the number of things that they're doing it's kind of overwhelming, actually. One of the things I thought this last time, and I don't know who came up with it at Paramount, but it was a great idea, is we had Optimus Prime being on Uber. Like, you could actually call Optimus Prime and get a ride, and that's a case of using digital app and really, frankly, just good business sense about the reach of that company. And it created a whole big thing. Wherever it was, whatever marketplace, it was really, and that, what I found was the interesting extension was, it started as the application, then people started talking about it digitally, then you started seeing people, on the nightly news talking about Optimus Prime driving through downtown, wherever it was at that time. So it expanded actually towards traditional media, which was kind of an interesting experience.
I assume that there are a lot of directors that think the way you think and think about digital marketing pretty regularly, talk about it, talk about extra content, that sort of thing. Are there actors who do the same? Do you find the actors, maybe particularly the younger actors, kind of coming up to you, to the producer and saying, what are you guys doing on mobile for this movie?
I haven't had that experience. I would think there are a number of actors who have had successful digital ventures. So I think it's inevitable that they will do that. And I think, one of the things that I'm certainly very keenly aware of, particularly in the next slate of movies that I'm involved in, is these YouTube stars have real audiences, and we would be foolish not to include them in our movies. And so I think, you're not going to just put somebody in because they have a big audience, but several of them have the potential to do, some are very specific, the parkour, extraordinary parkour, well, you could see that guy could do some crazy stunts and bring his audience with him. So I think that is where I'm going to go anyhow in the next group of movies, is I'd like to be able to bring that, somebody who has a real audience in a different space.
Has anybody emerged in the digital space that you think highly of as a film critic?
I'm not going to comment about film critics.
So I'm not going to. We're not going to hear anything positive about.
I don't know. Maybe there is. I have to say, after being involved in so many movies, I don't read reviews anymore. They make me insane. So I just can't. I can't do it anymore.
This idea of putting YouTube stars, using them in various ways, in the movie and marketing the movie, you've actually done that quite a bit in the past with musicians and singers in general, and if I remember correctly, rappers in particular.
Well, it's interesting because when growing up and watching movies, when they would try rock and roll stars, it rarely worked. And I think the reason is because your job as a rock and roll star is to look aloof and cool. So you actually don't interact with your audience. Whereas hip hop and rap, rap and hip hop is directly about the relationship that you have with your audience. So the transition for those artists has been really quite easy, actually, relatively speaking. And in some respects, they have an act, and they can play that act. And some of them, their job is to be cool too, and that I think it's a little bit harder. But, I think it's a natural.
Would you ever consider a celebutard in a movie? That would be people who are famous simply for being famous. So you have Paris Hilton, Kim Kardashian, etc.
No, I don't think I would.
Not the same appeal.
No,
okay.
No, because I think, look, on the one hand, you want to have it sticks out if you have somebody who can't do what you want them to do, And if that's all they are, I'm sure there's certain movies that would work with, where it's probably about putting a lot of them in it because that's the world you're trying to create. But when you're trying to create real acting, and I'm not saying any of them couldn't be good actors, but you wouldn't put them in because, oh, I know that's so-and-so.
Well, we have one final question. I didn't get the hook yet, but I'm sure we'll actually be a minute or two ahead of schedule then. As Lorenzo and I were talking the other day, I posed a question a little bit to him that was kind of generational in nature. We're literally of the same generation by only a few months separated. What happens when a young person comes to you today, 20-year-old, 22-year-old, graduated from Harvard, grew up in Vermont like you did, and says, what should I do? Should I go into traditional movie making? Should I go get a job like you did as an assistant to a studio executive? Or should I go into digital movie making? Is your career a career you would recommend to young people today?
It's really tricky answer. You know, what's interesting is that because on the one hand you'd say categorically I think digital is the future. On the other hand you'd say how do you get paid making digital content today? So it's you know, it is a longer play for kids that are coming up right now. You know, I'm sure I'm not familiar with some of the places that would help finance them, but in general, because the economics have not been figured out in a big way, I think, and we've not seen them played out in a big way yet, I know some YouTube stars have been able to monetize who they are, but that's a different thing. You know, if you're a filmmaker, you can't subsist on nothing, you know, other than the joy of making your films or your TV shows or your 5-minute pieces, you know.
Unless you're living in your mom's basement.
Yes, well, I think that is part of the issue, you know. So I think I would probably push somebody towards digital, but I'd try to find that company that does both, because I think also I think we're going to learn back and forth now in the next. I think one of the things I'm excited about is, as I was saying earlier, when you look at story in different ways, it changes you as a storyteller. So I find I just had this experience where I took a script that was a phenomenal script I read. It was literally the most expensive script I've ever read. It was unmakeable because it was so expensive, or it was borderline unmakeable. So I talked to the writer, and we went up and I said, look, I think we need to create a brand. We need to create an IP. So we actually went to Dark Horse Comics, and we are, I think they're on the 3rd episode of it right now. It's not been released yet, but you know, it's a really interesting exercise, because what I found was, as you took this long, big, sprawling script that was really a space opera in a sense, and you boiled it down to the first episode of the graphic novel. I think what I found was amazing is that the idea was really, really strong in its simplest form. And in talking to some of the graphic novel makers and creators, what I found interesting was, and confirmed my experience, was they say sometimes that one of two things happens. Either when you boil it down to that essential element, it gets boring, or it sticks. And so that reminds you, as now a 90-minute or 120-minute filmmaker, that how the basic concept has to stick, you know, and it just forces you to look at things. And even as big a movie, and I think in a sense, if you talk about Transformers 1, we boiled it down to the simplest idea: boy gets car, gets girl, which everybody sort of understands that on a rudimentary level, right? And everybody can connect to that. They're one part of that, or they've seen that happen. And so I think that's what's really interesting about the digital space. I find as a storyteller, is it's forcing me to remind myself of what is the strength of ideas.
I think we're going to leave it at that. Thank you very much, Lorenzo.
Thanks, everybody.